The name of the body in just formed is the Threefold Community Asset Trust. Our project is very specific to a particular situation in which the Camphill communities, which had a very, very strong community background, and the company limited by guarantee, essentially decided to move away from some of those community principles. And we had a housing project, which was an inclusive neighborhood, essentially based on kind of more current thinking of generated from the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with a Disability, in which people with disabilities could participate with support in the society as a whole on the basis of self-determination and inclusion. And so this project was developed and achieved planning permission, but in that process, the body that achieved that permission decided not to do it. And the communities also farmed and gardened and had a strong environmental agenda on land that was owned, which is also, in simple terms, the thinking became that of the HSE, who don't do housing, and they don't do human rights, and they don't do farming and gardening and environmental work. So the effort was to form, rather than lose those projects, to form a new pattern of development that is very, very close to the Community Land Trust values that would apply to housing, also to the land and farming and gardening and environmental work, also to cultural development, and also to social enterprise. Yeah, so it's not called the Community Land Trust, but the sense of assets being wider than either housing or land. And that's really, we started with a kind of creative approach involving the work of the art center that we had developed in Callan, and based on an evolution of the ideas of shared living. And we achieved planning permission for 25 dwellings, 16 of which were essentially social housing, and 9 of which were associated co-housing with people who are interested to live with people who are eligible for social housing. So, Rosie.
Okay, yeah, so just to kind of ground the project, we are based in Callan in County Kilkenny, which is a small town of 2,300 people. And the 2 sites that we're going to talk about today are in the pink, so an old workhouse site, so that's kind of a really nice connection to the last speaker, and then a kind of a garden site on the edge. So we're coming from Callan in rural Kilkenny. So as Patrick said, you know, the sort of impulse for Nimble Spaces came out of the kind of incredible work of KCAT Art Centre and using arts as this kind of really strong agent for change, and the shared living impulse of Camphill Callan. And this is in 2012 when the project began as through an arts-led process of really exploring what home means to me, and especially for people with a disability, an intellectual disability, where those kind of questions took a long time and were explored through sound, through movement, through choreography. This is a spatial workshop with Rona Byrne, where we're looking at kind of concepts of shelter and security and colour. And that led then to led on to a very kind of formative process that Lyd Architects developed, an enabling space game. And this was really kind of a building block from the kind of creative and artistic process into imagining what home means to me, and actually then being able to work through. And again, this is a 3-year process, so time was very, very important in the Nimble Space, this kind of creative phase of Nimble Spaces. So moving from this game, which people were able to express what kind of privacy and concepts of privacy and shared living and life meant to people. The architects, Lyd, who are very, very kind of are rooted in kind of in concepts of participatory design and co-design, were able to sort of explore the kind of game and the kind of workshop element and bring them into architectural designs on those two sites in Callan. And as Patrick said, in 2017, we achieved planning permission for 25 houses on you know, a number of different sites in Callan that were where we were able to bring, well, the architects through this co-design process was able to bring about a very complex kind of concept of different individuals' housing needs, differently interpreted, and that's a very complex process. But just to give you that is sort of the housing element. And Patrick now is going to really kind of, I suppose, open up what a community land trust can bring to this housing project, because that's kind of where we are now, quite a few years later. Again, we could, you know, this can be shared. Kind of, I can share this in the kind of these documents in the chat. But these were sort of the 5 very, very key building blocks to Nimble Spaces. So the enabling design process, people having access to their own home, right to housing, kind of, and then within an inclusive neighbourhood, also with smart homes and the environment being very key. Patrick's now going to talk about the sort of why a community land trust and why the Threefold Community Asset Trust.
Yeah. We realize we're stuffing a whole lot into in 15 minutes. The principles behind the Threefold Community Asset Trust is to do with an organization that can be flexible to address the individuality and the cultural element, the human interrelationships, the politics and the rights of people, and the economy of them. Essentially an economy that can manage sharing, and that those principles were operated quite successfully within communities, but are increasingly challenging to develop in a highly regulated market or in a society. But that idea that one organization can be flexible for the different particular needs of the people, and also for the organizations, that it wouldn't be one thing, and that's been important to us. So the process will transfer these assets that have belonged to the Camphill communities of Ireland, both the building sites and fields, and also sheds and buildings used for cultural and enterprise work projects. They would all be managed with a particular reference to the issues of property, which are increasingly complex, both in financial and regulatory terms. But the trust would make them available for the community, common interest, or charitable purposes of people who would make use of those properties, but they could be managed by the trust. So that would include the 25 houses in a format that is not yet defined, the farmland and gardening land, and also common interest land. We developed a project for nature and heritage trail that goes around a national monument, a Norman Mott, and also by a riverbank in the middle of the town, and which is of no commercial value to anybody, but is of very, very clear value to the locality. And so we have formed a company limited by guarantee, which we realize is not an ideal corporate format, but really is the only thing available that's kind of doable at the moment. And we are beginning a detailed formative process to flesh out the business plan, but also a values system that can be embedded in the company constitution. the practical implication of that is that there are, at the moment, 3 direct partners in the project. One, the social housing element, is moving to a large approved housing body, TUA, who operate something around 5,000 units in Ireland, who are interested in this project as a model, and they would address the government funding that is eligible for the social housing element. And the O'Coolan co-housing is a big in operation, they're rolling, they've got a methodology, and they would be the parent of the whole project. And then the Lynch co-housing group, which is specific to this project, is entirely based in Callan and will essentially be the residence element that Hannah described. So in that a partnership, which will be indirectly in partnership with the local authority. But the details of exactly how that is going to work are information as we speak. Yeah, there's an element of, in that top part, the cooperation, there's also a small nursery that is a developing social enterprise. The Workhouse Union, which Rosie represents, is a cultural activist, and Trasna is another cultural action group that was kind of born out of changes in Camphill. Asylum is a theatre company. There's a Steiner Waldorf school that is interested in developing a secondary school in part of the workhouse. So there's a complex group of people who would be working in flexible relationships to make all of this happen.
1 minute, Patrick and Rosie.
Just before we, finish, what inspired us to develop the Threefold Community Asset Trust? Because, Patrick and myself and lots of other people, I mean, I know a lot of you are also on this call, so hello to all our other collaborators, because it's been a long process. But why did we sort of move from, this Nimble Spaces, very, very much focused on housing, now to this looking at the land and ownership? And I think, we've realized, just to, Jane Jacobs, the American town planner who's been very influential, talking about in New York that frequent streets and short blocks are valuable because of the fabric of intricate crisscross that they permit among the users of a city neighborhood. And that's really, I think we realize that in order for kind of Nimble Spaces kind of concept to really fully develop, it needed much more activity and actors on, sharing those neighborhoods. So that's why we're bringing in the culture, bringing in the social enterprise and educational projects. So just really, I suppose that's underpinning is that it makes sure it doesn't silo or segregate into a housing project or a cultural project. So thank you.